The auctioneer's gavel had already fallen twice that morning before they dragged her up onto the block, and the crowd that had been fanning itself in the Carolina heat went suddenly, hungrily quiet. She stood a full head taller than any man in the yard. Her shoulders strained the seams of a flour sack dress gone grey with washing, and her arms, corded, scarred, thick as a smith's, hung at her sides like things carved rather than born. A woman near the front pressed a handkerchief to her mouth and laughed, the cruel, bright laugh people use to cover fear. "Lord," a planter muttered, "what do you even feed a thing like that?" Nobody bid. The auctioneer, a soft pink man named Hollis, who sweated through his coat by 9 each morning, worked the crowd and got nothing but jeers, and the price fell and fell, until it landed at a number so low it was an insult to speak aloud. Before I take you any further into this story, let me ask you one small thing. If you're the kind of person who believes the ones nobody wanted are often the ones worth everything, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me what town or country you're watching from tonight. It helps more than you know, and I read every single one. Now, back to that auction yard in the summer of 1849, and the man who reached into his pocket when everyone else had turned away. The town was Cheraw, and the day was a Saturday, and the auction had drawn the usual crowd. Planters in fine coats come to buy, poorer men come to watch, women beneath parasols, boys darting underfoot, and the ordinary Saturday traffic of a southern market town flowing around the edges of a business that the town had long since stopped seeing as anything remarkable. Men were bought and sold in that square, the way mules and hogsheads of tobacco were bought and sold, under the same sun, to the same drone of the same auctioneer, and the citizens of Cheraw fanned themselves and made their bids and thought nothing of it. It was only when the giant girl was brought up that the ordinary drone broke because she was a spectacle, a thing outside the day's dull commerce. And a crowd will always turn to a spectacle, the way a field turns to the sun. His name was Elias Warfield, and by every measure that mattered in Chesterfield district, he was a man on the losing end of his own life. His father had left him 400 acres of exhausted cotton land, a house with a sagging gallery, and debts stitched into every deed and ledger in the strongbox. His wife had died of fever 3 winters past, and with her had died whatever softness the world had left in him. He had gone hard and grey and quiet in his grief, a man moving through his days out of habit rather than hope. His fields, worked by too few hands, and those hands worn thin, brought in less each year. He had come to town that day not to buy, but to sell, a mule, a broken plough, whatever might buy him another season, and he had lingered at the edge of the auction, the way a hungry man lingers outside a bakery, wanting nothing he could afford. Then the girl was brought up, and the laughing started, and something in Elias Warfield went cold and still. He knew that laugh. He had heard it turned on himself often enough, the shabby Warfield boy, the failing farmer, the widower who couldn't keep his own gate on its hinges. He watched the girl keep her eyes fixed on a point above the crowd, her jaw set, refusing to flinch, and he recognized the particular labor of a person holding themselves upright under the weight of 100 stares. He did not decide to raise his hand so much as find it already raised. "I'll take her," he said, and his voice cracked the silence. Hollis blinked. "For the standing bid?" "Warfield, that's for the standing bid." The $3 in his palm were the last coined money he had in the world. The laughter did not stop. It changed. Now it was aimed at him. A man in a fine planter's coat clapped him on the shoulder as he passed and said, loud enough to carry, "Warfield's bought himself a plough horse that walks on 2 legs, going to marry it too?" And the yard howled. Elias felt the heat climb his neck, but he counted the coins into Hollis's damp hand, took the paper that made a human being his property, a paper that would sit in his chest like a swallowed stone for the rest of his days, and he turned to the girl and did the thing nobody in that yard expected. He took off his hat. "Ma'am," he said, though nobody had ever troubled to call her ma'am in her life, "my wagon's yonder. I'd be obliged if you'd ride up on the seat. Road's rough in the back." The girl looked down at him. She had to look down, and he saw her brace for the trick in it, the cruelty coming. It did not come. He simply waited, hat in hand, until she stepped off the block. The boards groaned under her. Somebody whistled. Elias ignored them all and walked her to the wagon, and when she hesitated at the high seat he offered his hand, and after a long moment she took it, and her grip could have crushed his fingers to meal, and instead was careful testing the grip of someone who had learned that gentleness in others was a thing to be verified before trusted. They rode out of town in silence with the sun hammering down and the cicadas screaming in the pines. The land unrolled around them, red clay roads cut deep by wagon wheels, fields of struggling cotton going grey-green in the drought, stands of loblolly pine that threw no shade where it was wanted, and everywhere the wet, heavy heat that lay on the chest like a hand. Elias watched the road. The girl watched everything else, her eyes moving over the countryside with a wariness that never rested. When they had gone 3 miles and the town was well behind them, she spoke for the first time, her voice low and rougher than he expected, as if it had gone long unused. "You're going to tell me what you want," she said. It was not a question. "Every man wants something, better to say it now." Elias kept his eyes on the mule's ears. "I want the North 40 cleared of stumps before frost," he said. "I want a fence mended. I want the well dug deeper. I want to bring in what cotton's left before it rots on the stalk, and I want to do it without watching another season take the last thing I've got." He was quiet a moment. "That's the whole of it. I won't lie and say the work's not hard. It's killing work, but I don't raise my hand to anybody, and I don't let anybody go hungry under my roof, and there's a bed in the loft room that's yours, and a door that latches from the inside." He glanced at her then. "What do they call you?" She studied him for a long, long moment, the way you'd study thin ice before trusting your weight to it. "Delphia," she said at last. "They call me Delphia." And something in the way she said it, "They call me," as if the name belonged to other people's mouths and not to her, told Elias Warfield that whatever this woman had survived to grow so tall and so guarded, it had cost her more than he could yet imagine. He nodded once as if a bargain had been struck, and clucked to the mule, and the wagon carried them on down the red road toward a farm that neither of them yet knew was about to change the course of both their lives. The Warfield place, when it rose out of the pines at the end of a rutted lane, was a study in genteel ruin. The main house had been white once and was now the color of an old tooth. The gallery sagged. 2 of the 4 chimneys had lost their caps. Behind the house stood a cluster of outbuildings, a smokehouse, a corn crib, a barn with a suede roof, and beyond them the fields ran down to a creek lined with willows. An old man sat on an upturned bucket in the yard, mending harness, and he rose when the wagon came in, shading his eyes. This was Cato, who had been born on the place and had worked it for 60 years, and had watched 3 generations of Warfields fail to make it pay. He looked at the giant woman on the wagon seat, and his weathered face did not laugh. It did something more complicated. It went still, and then it went soft, and then it did a thing Elias would remember later and not understand until much, much too late. Cato took off his own hat the way Elias had, and he said very quietly in a voice that shook, "Well now." That was all. Well now. And he looked at Delphia as if he were looking at a ghost that had come walking up out of the past to sit in his yard in the killing summer heat, and Delphia looked back at him with no recognition at all, and the moment passed, and the work of the failing farm swallowed it whole. But it had happened, and nothing that happens on a small place stays buried forever. The first weeks were a slow, wary circling. 2 guarded people learning the shape of each other across the width of a hard day's labor. Delphia worked in a way that stopped Elias's breath the first time he saw it. She put her shoulder to a pine stump that 4 men and a mule had failed to budge the season before, and she braced her bare feet in the red clay, and she heaved, and the earth gave up its grip with a groan and a tearing of roots. And the stump came over on its side, trailing dirt like a pulled tooth. She did it again with the next and the next. By the end of the first day, she had cleared more of the North 40 than Elias and Cato together had managed in a month. She did not brag on it. She did not even seem to notice she had done anything remarkable. She simply moved to the next task, wiping the sweat from her brow with a forearm, and asked in that low, rough voice, "What's next?" But strength was not the thing about her that Elias came to notice most. It was the watchfulness. She never sat with her back to a door. She ate fast, the way people eat who have learned that food can be taken from them. When Elias moved too quickly near her, reaching past her for a tool, coming around a corner unexpected, he saw her whole body go rigid, saw the flinch she fought down, and it made him slow himself, gentle himself, the way you would around a horse that had been beaten by its last owner. He never asked her what had been done to her. He did not have to. It was written in the scars on her back that he glimpsed once when her collar shifted, silver-white ridges laid crosswise, old and deep. It was written in the way she said thank you the first time he set aside the best of the cornbread for her, said it in a whisper, as if the words might be a trap. There was an evening early on that Elias would remember. Delphia had worked past dark, bringing in the last of the corn, and when she came to the well to wash, she found Elias had left a plate for her on the step, not scraps, not leavings, but the best of the supper, the piece of meat he might have kept for himself, set out on a clean cloth. She stood over it a long time. Then she said, not looking at him, "Why?" Just the one word. And Elias, who did not fully know the answer himself, said, "Because you worked hard, and a body that works hard ought to eat well. That's all." Delphia picked up the plate, as if it might be snatched away, and she ate standing up fast, the way she always ate. And when she was done, she washed the plate and the cloth and set them by the door, and she said so quietly he almost missed it, "Thank you." He understood, watching her, that she was thanking him not for the food but for the plain fact of being treated, for one meal as something better than a mule, and that even that small mercy she did not quite trust was braced against, was waiting to be revealed as a trick with a price attached. It broke his heart a little, and it settled something in him too. Cato watched her differently, and Elias began to notice it. The old man had taken to lingering wherever Delphia worked. He brought her water without being asked. He watched her hands when she gripped an axe or a hoe, watched her face in profile against the light, and once Elias caught him standing in the barn door with tears standing in his eyes, watching her pitch hay into the loft as if it was straw. When Elias asked him what was the matter, Cato wiped his face and said it was just the dust, just an old man's weak eyes, and went back to his mending. But he had begun to hum in the evenings, a low tune that Elias had never heard him hum before, a slow, sad, rolling melody with no words that Elias knew, and Delphia, hearing it from across the yard, would go very still, as if some deep and buried thing in her had been brushed by a hand she couldn't see. The trouble, when it came from outside, the way trouble on a struggling farm so often does. Word had spread through Chesterfield district that Elias Warfield had bought the giant girl for $3, and the district found it endlessly amusing, and then it found it useful. A neighbouring planter named Royce Pettigrew, whose lands adjoined the Warfield place on the creek side, was a man with a smooth face and a cold eye, and an appetite for other men's property. Pettigrew had wanted the Warfield bottom land for years. The creek acreage was the only good soil left on the place, and it commanded the water, and he had watched Elias sink slowly toward ruin with the patience of a man who knows a fruit will fall into his hand if he simply waits beneath the tree. He held a note against Elias, bought up from a Charleston factor, and he had been content to let it ride and gather interest while the farm withered. But the arrival of Delphia changed his arithmetic. He rode over on a fine bay horse one evening in early autumn, sat his saddle in the Warfield yard without dismounting, and looked down at Elias with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Heard you made a purchase, Warfield," he said. "Whole district's talking. $3. He let the number hang, savouring it. "Now, I'll be honest with you, neighbour. A creature like that's a working investment, whatever the district says. Field hand that does the work of 4. I'll give you 200 for her, cash money, and I'll knock 50 off the note besides." He spread his hands as if offering a gift. "You'd be a fool not to take it. You could pay down what you owe me and buy yourself 2 ordinary hands who won't frighten the horses." Behind Elias, in the doorway of the house, Delphia had gone motionless. He could not see her, but he could feel her there, feel the stillness of her, the particular held breath of a person who has learned that decisions about her life are made by other men over her head, in her hearing, as though she were furniture being haggled over, which in the eyes of the law and of Royce Pettigrew she was. Elias did not turn to look at her. He kept his eyes level on the mounted man and said, "She's not for sale." Pettigrew's smile thinned. "Everything's for sale, Warfield," he said softly. "It's just a question of the price and the pressure. You remember, I hold your paper." He gathered his reins, in no hurry, a man who had said what he came to say and knew it would work on the listener like water on stone given time. Think on it. $200 solves a great many of a man's troubles. Pride solves none of them. And he turned his fine bay horse and rode away into the dusk, unhurried, and the threat rode away with him and settled over the farm like the first cold of the coming winter. When Elias finally turned to the doorway, Delphia was gone from it, back into the shadows of the house, and at supper she would not meet his eye, and he understood that Pettigrew's words had landed on her too, the $200. The plain public reckoning of what she was worth as meat and muscle, set against the $3 he had paid. Every number, a fresh humiliation dressed up as commerce. That night, for the first time, Delphia spoke to Elias of her own accord about something other than the work. She found him on the sagging gallery, where he sat with his head in his hands over the ledger and its columns of figures that never balanced. She stood at the foot of the steps. She was tall enough that even so their eyes were nearly level, and she said, "You should have took his money." Elias looked up. "No," he said. "You don't owe me nothing," she said, and there was something raw under the roughness now. "You paid $3. That man's offering $200. Any sane man takes it. You take it, you save your place, and I go work his ground instead of yours. It's all the same to me. One master's like the next." But even as she said it, Elias saw that it was not all the same to her, saw the way she watched his face for his answer, and he understood that she had said the cruel practical thing precisely to see whether he would agree to it. One more test of the ice. "It's not the same," Elias said quietly. "Not to me." He closed the ledger. "I don't know what all's been done to you, Delphia. I can see some of it. I expect I can't imagine the rest. But you came onto this place and you didn't laugh at it the way everybody else does, and you put your back into ground that beat me, and you've been square with me from the first mile of that road. I paid $3 because nobody else would give you the plain decency of a bid, and I'll be damned before I hand you to a man like Pettigrew for $200, so he can wring you dry and toss you aside. That's not a bargain. That's just a longer way of doing the same wrong they did you in that yard." He stood, tired, and picked up the lamp. "You've got a bed and a door that latches, same as I said. Good night." And he went inside, and Delphia stood a long while in the dark yard with the crickets sawing around her, and something in the frozen creak of her began very slowly to thaw. Winter closed over Chesterfield district, and it was a hard one. The cotton came in thin and poor, barely enough to cover the interest on Pettigrew's note, and Elias sold the last of the good mules and 2 hogs to make up the difference, riding into town himself to hand the money to Pettigrew's agent, so he would not have to see the man's satisfied face. But if the farm was failing slower now, it was failing slower because of Delphia, and everyone on the place knew it. She had dug the well 8 feet deeper single-handed, standing in the cold muck at the bottom and passing up buckets of clay until sweet water welled in where before there had been only silt. She had mended the barn roof, walking the ridgepole with a load of shakes on her shoulder that would have staggered 2 men. She had done the killing work, the work that had been slowly killing Elias, and she had done it without complaint, and something had shifted in the small, strange household because of it. They had become, without any of them quite saying so, a kind of family. The failing widower, the old man, and the giant woman nobody wanted. It was a strange household, and it would have scandalized the district had the district troubled to look closely. But the district had written the Warfield place off, and its very failure gave it a kind of privacy. Behind the sagging gallery, out of the world's sight, 3 people who had each been discarded in their own way, the widower by fortune, the old man by age, the woman by the auction block, kept each other warm through a hard winter. In the evenings they sat around the kitchen hearth, the only warm room in the draughty house, and Cato told stories of the old days on the place, of Elias's grandfather, and the year the creek froze solid, and the time a panther took a calf right out of the near pasture, and Elias mended harness, and Delphia sat with her great scarred hands still in her lap and listened. Sometimes when the fire burned low and the talk ran out, the silence in that kitchen was the first easy silence Delphia had known in her life. A silence with no threat in it, no waiting for the blow, Just 3 tired people, and the pop of the fire, and the wind shut out beyond the walls. She had begun to talk a little more, not about her past, never about that, but about the work, about the land, about small things. She noticed the weather before it turned. She knew, somehow, how to gentle a frightened animal, how to set a bird's broken wing, how to find water and read the sky. Elias began teaching her letters by the firelight, scratching them on a slate. It was a dangerous thing he was doing, and they both knew it. Teaching an enslaved person to read was against the law in South Carolina, a crime that could bring a fine or worse. For the men who made the laws understood that letters were a kind of key, and that a person who could read might one day read a pass, a map, a newspaper, a route north. Elias did it anyway, in the shut kitchen with the curtains drawn, and Delphia bent over the work with a fierce concentration, her tongue between her teeth, her great hand clumsy around the little nub of chalk, forming the letters over and over until they came right. She learned fast, faster than Elias would have guessed, as if the ability had been in her all along waiting. And when she wrote her own name for the first time, Delphia, the letters large and careful, marching a little uphill across the slate, she stared at it for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched it lightly with one fingertip, as if to be sure it was real. Then she covered it with her hand as if it were something private and precious that the world might take. "That's mine," she said, mostly to herself. "That's my own name, and I wrote it. Nobody wrote it for me. I wrote it." And Elias, mending harness by the fire, had to look hard at his work for a while and say nothing at all. It was Cato who finally broke the thing open. On a bitter night in January, when the wind came down out of the north and rattled the loose panes and drove them all close to the fire. He had been humming that tune again, the slow, rolling, wordless melody, and Delphia had gone still the way she always did. And this time Cato did not stop. He hummed it through to the end, and then he set down the trace chain he was mending, and he looked at Delphia across the firelight with his old eyes wet and shining, and he said, "That song, you know that song." Delphia's face did not move, but her hands tightened. "I don't know no song," she said. "You do," Cato said gently. "You went still to it the first night you come here and every night since. Your body knows it even if your mind's shut the door on it. That's a cradle song, girl. That's a song a woman sings to a baby on her knee. And I know it, and you know it because I have heard it before, sung in this very county 40 years and more ago by a woman named Junie, who could pick a bale of cotton with a child on her back and lift a fallen ox out of a ditch with her own 2 arms. He leaned forward. "A woman built just exactly like you." The room had gone very quiet. Elias set down his work. Delphia was staring at the old man now, and the guardedness on her face had cracked, and underneath it was something like fear. "You're talking foolishness," she whispered. "Old man's foolishness." "Maybe," Cato said, "but answer me one thing, and I'll hush. That mark on your shoulder and the one back of your neck that you keep covered, is it a burn? Round? Like a coin? Puckered in the middle?" Delphia went absolutely rigid. Her hand rose, without her willing it, to the back of her neck, to the collar of her dress, and the answer was in the gesture before she found any words. Cato let out a breath that was half a sob. "Junie's baby had a mark like that," he said, "born with a caul and a birthmark both, back of the neck round as a Spanish dollar. The old women said it meant the child was marked for something. Marked to be lost, some said. Marked to be found again, said others." He wiped his face with a shaking hand. "That baby was sold off this county when she was 4 years old, sold away from her mama in a debt settlement, screaming, and Junie screaming after the wagon, and the child's name—" His voice broke. "The child's name was Delphia. Her mama named her Delphia after Delphia that was in the Bible, and nobody ever heard of her again. Till a wagon come up my lane last summer with a giant girl on the seat, going still to a cradle song. For a moment after Cato finished, no one in the kitchen moved. The fire popped. The wind found the loose pane and worried it. Delphia sat with her great hands, flat on her knees, and her eyes fixed on nothing. And when she finally spoke, her voice came out cracked and small, a child's voice in a giant's body. "I don't remember her," she said. "I want to. I've wanted to my whole life. There's just a shape. A big warm shape and hands, and that song. I always thought I dreamed it. I always thought I made her up because I needed her so bad." She looked up at Cato. "You're telling me she was real. You're telling me she was real and she was here, in this county, and she—" Her voice failed. "She looked for me." 30 years, Cato said softly. "She looked for you 30 years, child." And Delphia made a sound then that Elias would never forget, a sound like something tearing loose that had been rusted shut a lifetime, and she got up from the table and went out into the cold without her shawl, and neither man followed her, because there are moments a soul has to meet by itself. Delphia did not sleep that night. Elias heard her through the floor, moving in the loft room, the boards creaking under her restless weight, and once he heard a sound he had never heard from her before, a low, broken, animal sound of grief, quickly stifled, the sound of a person weeping who has taught herself never to be heard weeping. He lay awake and listened, and did not go up, because he understood that some griefs must be met alone before they can be met together. In the morning she came down hollow-eyed and would not speak of it, and went out to the frozen woodlot and split stove wood until her hands bled, and Elias let her, because he understood that too. But the thing was open now, and it could not be closed. Over the following days, in pieces, at odd hours, the story came out. From Cato, mostly, for Delphia herself remembered almost nothing before the age of 5 or 6, and what she remembered she had buried so deep that only the cradle song could reach it. Cato remembered it all. He had been a young man on the neighbouring Ashford place when Junie's child was born, and he remembered the whole county, marvelling at the size of the baby and at the strength of the mother, who was said to be descended from a people in Africa, bred by slavers for their bodies the way men breed oxen. He remembered the debt that had ruined the Ashfords, and the settlement that had scattered their people to the 4 winds, and the particular cruelty of the trader who had taken the 4-year-old, a man who dealt in children precisely because they could be carried far and sold where no one knew them, their origins erased, their names replaced, their mothers left screaming in the dust of the road. "They took you south," Cato said. "Down into the cotton country is what they said. Down into Mississippi, Alabama, someplace the cane and the cotton eat people up. And your mama." He stopped. "Your mama never stopped. 15 years she worked that Ashford place before it changed hands again, and every soul that come through, every trader, every drover, every free black man traveling with a pass, she'd ask, 'You seen a girl, big girl, mark on her neck, you seen my Delphia?' She'd send word by the grapevine telegraph. You know how word travels among us, hand to hand, mouth to mouth, faster than any letter. Word went out for years. A mother looking for a stolen child. And it never come back with an answer, and folks stopped asking, and Junie—" Cato's voice failed him. Elias, sitting quiet in the corner, saw Delphia's face, and had to look away from the nakedness of what was on it. "Is she living?" Delphia said. It was the first question she had asked. "My mother. Is she living?" And Cato, who was a truthful man, said the truthful thing, which was, "I don't know, child, I don't know. She was sold off this county her own self 10 years back, when the Ashford place broke up for the last time. West, they said. But I don't know where, and I don't know if she's above ground, and I won't lie to you and say I do." Delphia nodded slowly, absorbing it, and then she said something that broke Elias's heart clean in two. She said, "I used to make her up. When I was little, on that first place they took me, I couldn't remember her face, so I made up a big warm woman with strong arms, and I told myself that was my mama, and when they whipped me I'd go to her in my head." She looked at the fire. "Turns out I wasn't making her up. Turns out I was remembering. All this time I thought I didn't have nothing, and I had her right there behind the door I shut. I just couldn't get to her." Here the story must pause and step out of that firelit kitchen, because Delphia's stolen childhood was not a rare misfortune, but the ordinary machinery of American slavery, and the record of it is exact. Between 1790 and 1860, the domestic slave trade tore roughly 1 million enslaved people from the Upper South and drove them to the cotton and sugar frontier of the Deep South, a forced migration sometimes called the Second Middle Passage. It shattered families as a matter of routine. Historians estimate that a quarter to a third of enslaved marriages in the exporting states were destroyed by sale. Traders openly preferred to sell young children away from their mothers, because a child carried far from home could not run back to anything it knew. The laws of every southern state defined enslaved people as chattel, movable property, like livestock, granting them no legal claim to their own children, no standing in court, and no marriage any owner was bound to honor. For decades after emancipation, advertisements seeking lost relatives ran in black newspapers by the thousands, each one a parent or child still asking the same question Junie asked into the dust of the road. Have you seen my child? Delphia's mother was one voice in a chorus of hundreds of thousands. It is against that deliberate cruelty that we must understand what came next on the Warfield place. For the men who profited from that machinery did not intend to let one giant girl and one failing farmer simply keep each other. Spring came late and mean to Chesterfield district, and with it came Royce Pettigrew, no longer content to wait beneath the tree. He called in the note. He did it legally through a Charleston attorney, in a letter that arrived on fine paper, and gave Elias 60 days to pay the whole sum or forfeit the creek bottom land, the only acreage worth having, the land that would leave the rest of the farm worthless without it. Elias read the letter twice and set it down on the kitchen table and put his head in his hands. And Delphia read it over his shoulder, slowly, sounding out the long words she had learned by the winter fire. And when she understood it, she went very quiet and very still, and Elias knew what she was thinking before she said it. $200, she said. That's what he offered for me. You sell me to him, you clear near half the note in one stroke, and you find the rest somehow. It's the only way you keep the land. Elias lifted his head. We've had this talk, he said. This ain't the same talk, Delphia said. Last time it was pride. This time it's arithmetic. You lose that bottom land, you lose everything, the place, the graves, your daddy's name on the deed, all of it. For what? For me? A woman you paid $3 for and known one winter. That's not a bargain either, Elias. That's just a foolishness dressed up as decency. But her voice shook on the last word, and Elias understood that she was not truly arguing to be sold. She was doing the thing she always did, laying out the cruel practical arithmetic and watching his face to see whether this time, with everything on the line, he would finally take it. She was testing the ice one last time, with her whole weight. No, Elias said. And then he said the rest of it, the thing he had not let himself say through the whole long winter. I'm not selling you because you're not mine to sell. That paper in the strongbox says you are. I know what it says. But I've known the truth of it for months, and I'll say it plain now. You're not my property and you're not my field hand. You're the reason this house has laughing in it again. You're the reason I get up before light, glad of the day. He turned the ledger over in his hands, not looking at it. When Sarah died, my wife, I stopped noticing things. The sun coming up, the smell of the fields after rain. All of it went grey, and I let it, because it was easier to let it. And then a wagon come up that lane with you on it, and slow, without me hardly knowing, things started having colour again. The stumps you pulled, the well running sweet. You bent over that slate spelling out your own name like it was the finest thing you ever made. And it was. He stopped, his face red, a man unused to speaking his heart. I paid $3 for you, and you have paid me back 100-fold, and none of it was ever the work. It was you. I'd sooner lose every acre and go sharecrop another man's dirt than hand you to Pettigrew. And if that's foolishness, then I'm a fool, and I'll be a fool clear to the grave. Now let's hear no more about selling. We'll find another way. Delphia did not answer for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, in a voice stripped of all its roughness, Nobody ever said a thing like that to me. In my whole life, nobody. And she went inside before he could see her face, and Elias heard the loft-boards creak above him long into the night, and did not know whether she was weeping or only lying awake, learning the strange new weight of having been wanted. But there was no other way, and they both knew it, and the 60 days began to run like water through open fingers. Elias rode the whole district looking for a loan and found every door shut. No man would lend against a failing farm, and no man wished to cross Pettigrew, who had a long memory and a longer reach. He tried to sell timber off the back 40 and found that Pettigrew, anticipating him, had already spread word that the title was clouded and no buyer would touch it. Every road out was blocked, quietly, methodically, by a man who had all the time and money in the world and wanted one small piece of creek bottom badly enough to squeeze a neighbor into the ground to get it. And all the while Delphia worked harder than ever, as if she could hold the farm together with the strength of her 2 arms alone, clearing new ground, planting a garden that might feed them through the ruin she saw coming, digging as though she could dig their way out. It was Cato who thought of the mother. "Junie," he said one evening. "She was sold west 10 years back, but west from here in those days meant one of maybe 3 markets, and a woman that size, that strong. Folks always remembered Junie." He looked at Delphia. "The grapevine still runs, child. Word still travels mouth to mouth, place to place, faster than these white men know. If your mama's living, somebody knows where. And if we could find her—" He stopped. Elias finished the thought slowly. "If we could find her, and if she's on a place that could be reasoned with—" He shook his head. "It's a thin hope, a thin, wild hope." "It's more hope than we had this morning," said Delphia. And for the first time in weeks there was something other than dread in her face. So they sent word out. It went the way such word had always gone among the enslaved people of the South, by the invisible network that ran beneath the notice of masters, the grapevine telegraph, the passing of news from a driver to a ferryman, to a woman drawing water to a man with a pass to travel. It was a network the masters did not believe in, and could not have broken if they had, for it had no wires to cut and no office to burn. It lived in memory and in trust, in the split second of a glance exchanged at a crossroads, in a verse of a work song altered to carry a name, in the words murmured between 2 people passing on a road with their hats' brims low. Through that network, the enslaved had for generations warned each other of a cruel overseer down the way, of a sail coming, of a patrol riding tonight. And through it, now, went the strangest and most hopeful message of all. Cato carried it first, to the people on the neighboring places on a Sunday when visiting was allowed, walking miles on his old legs to sit in a quarter doorway and tell it plain. A giant woman named Delphia, found at last on the Warfield place, looking for her mother Junie, sold west a decade past, herself a giant marked and known. And the word travelled, as words did, out along the creeks and the county roads and the market towns, hand to hand, mouth to mouth, carrying the oldest and most human of all questions out into the wide, cruel country. "Does anybody know where my mother is? Does anybody know if she still lives? Tell her I'm found. Tell her I'm looking. Tell her I never stopped, even when I forgot her face. Tell her the door I shut is open now and I am coming." The answer came in April, 3 weeks before the note fell due, carried by a free black drayman named Solomon, who travelled the district with a pass and a wagon and a memory like a courthouse ledger. Such men were the arteries of the grapevine. They had legal leave to move, to haul goods from town to landing to plantation, and in the beds of their wagons and the folds of their memories, they carried more than freight. Solomon had been hearing the message about the giant girl for 2 weeks, passed to him at a ferry landing by a man who'd had it from a woman who'd had it from a cousin, and something in it had caught in him and would not let go, and he had gone out of his way, at some risk, following the thread of it west and then back east again until he was sure. He came up the Warfield lane at dusk, and he would not speak until he had looked at Delphia a long moment in the failing light, measuring her against something in his mind, against the description he'd been carrying and against something older, some ache of his own. And then he took off his hat. Everyone took off their hats to her, Elias had noticed. There was that in her bearing that called it forth, and he said, "There's a woman on the Verrill place 40 mile west past the Watery, big woman, strong past believing. Been there 9-10 years, keeps to herself, they say. Sings a song nobody else knows of an evening." He turned the hat in his hands. "And they say, not I, the people on that place say, she asks every soul that passes through, has been asking so long they've stopped hearing it, the way you stop hearing a clock. She asks, 'Have you seen my girl, big girl, mark on her neck?'" His voice went soft. "Her name's Junie. 40 miles was nothing and everything. On a map it was a day's hard ride. In the world Delphia lived in, It was a distance measured not in miles but in passes and patrols, and the 10,000 ways a southern county could stop a black woman traveling and never let her go. The slave patrols that rode the roads at night, the law that made any unaccompanied black person presumed a runaway, the certainty that a giant woman on the road alone would be seized within the hour and jailed and sold. She could not simply go. And Elias could not simply take her, for to take her onto another man's plantation and lay claim to his property was a thing that could end with both of them dead in a ditch and the law calling it justice. But the virile place could perhaps be reasoned with if a white man of some standing made the approach, and Elias Warfield, for all his poverty, was a white man with his name on a deed, and that, in the terrible arithmetic of that world, was a key that could open doors that were bolted against Delphia forever. They made their plan by firelight, the three of them and Solomon the drayman, who had agreed to guide them for reasons he did not fully explain, but that had something to do with the way he had said Junie's name. Elias would ride to the virile place openly, as a planter seeking to buy a strong field hand, a story that would raise no alarm, for such visits were common. He would see the woman. He would confirm she was Junie. And then, if God was merciful and the virile owner was a man who could be dealt with, he would try to buy her, though where the money would come from, with the note falling due and Pettigrew's jaws closing, none of them could say. It was a plan made mostly of holes, but it was a plan, and it was more than they had possessed in a year. And Delphia agreed to it, because the alternative was to sit still while the last thread that connected her to her own beginning frayed and broke. Then Pettigrew moved first. He had spies, as such men always do, a hand on a neighboring place who carried tales for a coin, or perhaps only the ordinary leakage of news through a talking countryside, where a drayman's questions and a Sunday's visiting could not stay secret for long. And he learned that Warfield was planning some journey west, and he guessed shrewdly that it touched somehow on the giant girl he coveted. It gnawed at him. He was a man who needed to own the ending of every story he was in, and here was Warfield, the district's joke. The failing man he had all but buried, moving pieces on a board Pettigrew could not quite see. He did not intend to let Elias find whatever he was seeking. On the very eve of the planned journey, Pettigrew rode into the Warfield yard with 3 mounted men behind him, rough men, patrollers by their look, and he did not smile this time. "Warfield," he said, "I've come to collect. The note's not due for 3 weeks, but I find I've lost patience. I'll take the girl now against the debt, and we'll call the balance settled when the land comes to me at forfeit. $200, as offered. She's coming with me tonight." Behind him, one of the patrollers uncoiled a rope from his saddle. "Legal or not," Pettigrew added softly, "she's coming. You're one man, Warfield, and it's dark, and the road's long. Be sensible." What happened next happened fast, and Elias would turn it over in his mind for the rest of his life. He stepped in front of the gallery, in front of the door behind which Delphia stood, and he said, "She's not property to be seized, Pettigrew, and even if she were, you've no writ, no order, nothing but 3 hired men and the dark. This is robbery, and I'll say so to the magistrate." Pettigrew laughed. "The magistrate's my wife's cousin," he said. "Stand aside," and he nodded to his men, and the patrollers swung down from their horses, and then the door behind Elias opened, and Delphia came out. She came out slow, and she filled the doorway and then the gallery, rising to her full towering height in the lamplight, and the 3 patrollers stopped where they stood. One of them, a young one, took an involuntary step backward and had to catch himself against the gallery post. The horses shifted and stamped, catching the fear off their riders. She had a look on her face that Elias had never seen, not fear, not the old guardedness, but a vast and terrible calm, the calm of a woman who has decided that she will not be taken back into the dark from which she has only just begun to climb. She did not shout. She did not raise a hand. She simply looked at the men, one after another, holding each one's eyes until he looked away, the way a person looks away from a fire that is too hot to face. And then she looked at Pettigrew, and she spoke in that low, rough voice, and every word fell into the silence like a stone into a well. "I have been sold 4 times, she said. "I have been whipped past counting. I have been carried away from everything I ever loved twice over, and I have found my way back to the edge of it. My mother's living 40 miles west, and I mean to see her face before I die." She took one step forward, and the gallery groaned under her. "You want to lay hands on me tonight. You go on and try. But I promise you this, it'll cost you more than $200. It'll cost you more than you've got." For a long moment the yard hung on the edge of violence, and Elias's heart hammered, for he knew that if it came to blood, even Delphia's strength could not stand against 3 armed men and a 4th, and that whatever happened after would be laid at her feet and paid for with her life. But Royce Pettigrew was a coward at the root, as cruel men so often are, and he looked at the giant woman on the gallery and at the 3 hired men who had suddenly lost their appetite for the work, and he did the sum, and he did not like the answer. "This isn't finished," he said, backing his horse. "The note's still due. You've 3 weeks, Warfield, and not a soul in this district will lend you a dime. I'll have the land, and I'll have her, and I'll have the pleasure of taking my time about it." And he wheeled and rode into the dark with his men trailing, and the threat hung behind him in the yard like smoke. But he had blinked. He had backed down. And in doing so he had given them their 3 weeks, and their chance. Elias rode west at first light with Solomon guiding him, the 2 of them keeping a careful distance on the road. A white man and a black man could not ride as equals in that country, and so Solomon rode a length behind as a servant would, and they spoke only when the road ran empty. They crossed the Watery on a flatboat ferry, poled by a silent man who eyed Solomon's pass and Elias's shabby coat and asked no questions, and on the far bank the land changed, grew flatter and richer, the cotton standing taller and greener than anything that would grow in Chesterfield's worn-out dirt. They passed plantations far grander than the Warfield place, white houses with double galleries and long rows of quarters behind them, and Elias felt the smallness of his own errand, one broke farmer chasing one grey woman across a country that measured a man's worth in acres and heads. They slept one night in a pine thicket off the road, not daring an inn, and there in the dark Solomon told him a little more of why he had come, that he'd had a sister once, sold off when he was a boy, and had spent his whole manhood carrying other people's messages up and down the district, partly in the mad hope that one day the message would be about her. "Never was," he said, "but I keep carrying them. You carry enough of them home. Maybe it counts for something. Maybe it counts for her wherever she's at." Elias had no answer to that, and the 2 men lay listening to the whippoorwills and did not sleep much. They came up into the Verrill lands by the middle of the 2nd day, and Elias played his part. A poor planter looking to buy a strong hand cheap, and old Verrill, who was land-rich and cash-poor, and no friend to the trouble a note-holder like Pettigrew could bring, received him civilly and walked him out to the fields, grumbling the whole way of debts and drought and the price of cotton, a man Elias recognized at once as another version of himself, sliding down the same long slope. And there, at the far end of a cotton row, straightening up from her work with a hand pressed to the small of her back, was a woman gone grey and bent but still enormous, still a head taller than any soul around her, and when she turned and Elias saw her face, the wide brow, the deep-set eyes, the very set of the jaw he knew. He had to grip the fence rail to keep his feet, because it was Delphia's face aged 30 hard years, and he knew past any doubt that he had found her. Junie, the mother who had never stopped asking, the woman who had sung a cradle song into an empty house for 30 years, waiting for a child the whole world had told her was gone forever. Elias did not tell Junie that day who he was or why he had come. He could not. One wrong word in front of Verrill, one flicker of hope on that grey face, and the whole fragile plan could shatter. He completed his false errand, haggled unconvincingly over a price he could not pay, said he would think on it and return, and rode away with his heart in pieces, carrying the image of that face back across the Watery to the daughter who had made up a mother out of longing and had it turn out real. When he told Delphia, when he described the wide brow and the deep eyes and the way the old woman pressed her hand to the small of her back, exactly as Delphia did, the same gesture, mother and daughter easing the same ache across 40 miles and 30 years. Delphia sat down slowly on the gallery steps, her great frame folding and for a moment she could not speak at all. Then she said, "What did she look like? Tell me again. Tell me every part of it." And Elias told her again, slower, sparing nothing, the grey in the hair that had once been black, the stoop in shoulders that had once been straight as Delphia's own, the hands, the eyes, the way she'd looked up from her work at the sound of a stranger's voice, with a flicker of the old hope she'd surely long since stopped letting herself feel. And Delphia listened as if she were drinking it, as if each detail were a piece of a face she had spent a lifetime trying to assemble in the dark. And when Elias finished, she wept, and this time she did not stifle it, did not turn away, did not muffle the sound against her sleeve, the way she had that first night in the loft. She wept openly, a grown woman crying like a child for a mother, and Elias sat beside her and let her weep against his shoulder, his arm around her, though she was half again his size, and Cato stood in the yard with his hat in his hands, and his old face shining wet in the dusk, and the crickets sang, and something that had been broken for 30 years began, at last, to knit. But wanting was not having, and finding was not freeing, and between Delphia and her mother stood the same wall that stood between every enslaved person and their heart's desire, money and law and the will of men who owned them. Verrill would sell Junie. He needed cash and the old woman's best working years were behind her, but he wanted $300, and Elias did not have $3, let alone 300. And the note to Pettigrew fell due in 19 days. It seemed impossible. It was impossible. And yet the news of it had gone out along the grapevine telegraph, the way all news went, and news of that kind. A lost mother found, a giant girl who had climbed up out of the dark, a good white farmer trying against all odds to reunite them, was the kind of news that moved people. It moved them in the quarters of a dozen plantations, where men and women who had themselves lost children and mothers and husbands to the trade heard the story and wept, and reached into hiding places for the few coins they had saved over years toward some small dream of their own. It moved the free black community of the district, the draymen and the ferrymen and the skilled tradesmen who lived in the narrow margin the law allowed them, who passed a hat, quietly, dangerously, among themselves. It even moved a few white folk, a widow who had lost her own daughter to fever and could not bear the thought of a mother losing one to something crueler, a young preacher new to the district who had begun to doubt the thing his elders called God's ordained order, old Verrill himself, who knocked $50 off the price when Solomon finally, cautiously, told him the truth of what he was selling. The coins came in ones and twos, and each one had a story. A blind old man on the Harmon place sent a single silver bit tied in a rag, carried by a boy, with word that he'd been saving it toward a headstone for himself, but reckoned a living mother was worth more than a dead man's marker. A cook on the Pettigrew place itself, on Pettigrew's own place under his own roof, sent what she'd hoarded from selling eggs on the side, and sent with it a message that made Delphia put her hand over her mouth. "Tell her some of us been praying on this a long time, and we don't none of us forget a mother that never quit." A free black cooper in the town sent a whole $1 and would not give his name. 2 field hands on the Verrill place who had known Junie 10 years and had heard her sing her song into the dark 10 years running, sent a handful of copper and a request that if the thing came off, if the mother truly went free, somebody bring word back across the watery, so they might know that once, one time, the story ended the way it was supposed to. Elias kept the money in a sock in the strongbox and counted it by candlelight and watched it grow, dollar by painful dollar, and watched too how far it still had to go, and felt the 19 days burning down like a fuse. But it was not enough. 19 days was too short, and the sum was too large, and the arithmetic still did not close, until Delphia herself closed it. She went to Pettigrew. She walked the 4 miles to his fine columned house alone, in daylight, her head high, and she stood in his yard and called him out. And when he came onto his gallery, she made him an offer. "You want the bottom land," she said. "You've wanted it for years, and you want to see Warfield broke, and you want to see me put back in my place. Well, here's what you can have. I'll go with you, freely, no fight. I'll sign whatever mark you want on whatever paper, and I'll work your ground, and you'll have the strongest hand in the district for the rest of my days." In exchange, you tear up Warfield's note. All of it. He keeps his land. And you give the money you'd have paid for me, the 200, to old Verrill west of the Watery for a broke-down grey woman that can't pick half a bale. That's my price. You get me. Elias keeps his farm, and my mother goes free to live out her days on the Warfield place, where there's a bed and a door that latches. She looked at him steadily. That's the whole of it. Take it or don't. It was the cruelest bargain, and the most loving. She was selling herself back into bondage to buy her mother's freedom and her benefactor's survival, trading her own hard-won hope for theirs. Pettigrew, who could not comprehend such a thing, saw only that he was being offered everything he wanted, and he took it greedily before she could think better of it, and it might have ended there. It would have ended there, with Delphia's terrible sacrifice standing, except that Elias Warfield, when he learned what she had done, did a thing that Royce Pettigrew, in all his scheming, had never once imagined a broken, beaten man might do. He went to the county seat, and he went to the one power in that county that stood above even a rich man's wife's cousin, the magistrate. He went to the newspaper, and to the Methodist circuit rider, and to every planter who had ever resented Pettigrew's grasping, and he told the whole story loudly, publicly, in the language of honor that Southern men could not ignore. That Pettigrew had tried to seize a man's household by night with hired ruffians, without writ or law, and had been faced down by a lone woman and had then extorted from that woman a bargain no gentleman could countenance. He shamed him. And he did it with a patience and a cunning that no one who had watched him fail for a year would have believed him capable of. He dressed in his one good coat, brushed and mended, and he called on men in their parlors and spoke to them not of law but of honor, of what it meant that a Chesterfield gentleman had ridden by night with hired ruffians and a rope to seize a household, and had been stared down and sent packing by a lone woman on a gallery. He let the picture do the work, Pettigrew, the great man, backing his horse out of a poor farmer's yard because he had not the stomach to face what he'd come to take. He told it at the crossroads store, and let it travel the grapevine of the whites the way news travelled the grapevine of the blacks. And by the third day it had grown in the telling, until half the district was laughing at Royce Pettigrew behind their hands, and a man of his kind could bear anything but that. The reckoning came at the county seat on court day, when the square was full. Elias stood on the courthouse steps and said his piece plainly, for any who cared to hear, and a Methodist circuit rider, a young man with a hard, clear voice and a growing private horror at the things his calling asked him to bless, stood beside him and said that a bargain extorted by night riders was a bargain no Christian court should honor. The magistrate, Pettigrew's own wife's cousin, sat in his window above the square and felt the weight of every eye, and understood that his own name was now roped to Pettigrew's in the district's mouth, and made the calculation such men always make. He found upon careful review that the attempted seizure had indeed been unlawful, wanting any writ, that a bargain struck under such duress could not stand, and that the note, given all the irregularity now attached to it, would be best simply satisfied and discharged. In a society built on the appearance of honor, Elias had taken Pettigrew's true face and held it up in the town square, and the district that had laughed at the Warfield boy for a year discovered it despised the grasping Pettigrew more. Pettigrew, to save what remained of his standing, tore up the note himself, in public, on the courthouse steps. For honor's sake it was given out, and Delphia's mark on his paper was declared void, and the man rode home with his face the color of ash, and did not show it in town for a long season after. How the last of the money was found, the 300, less Verrill's 50, less the 200 wrung at last from a humiliated Pettigrew as the price of the district's forgiveness, is a story of 100 small hands, and it is the truest part of this whole account. Before we tell its ending, the story must pause once more and speak plainly, because what saved Delphia was not one man's cleverness, but a hidden nation's solidarity, and that too is a matter of record. Enslaved and free. Black Americans built, beneath the surface of the slave-holding South, dense networks of mutual aid the historical record confirms in detail. The grapevine telegraph was real. News and warnings traveled among the enslaved, with a speed that repeatedly astonished slaveholders, carried by watermen, teamsters, and travelers moving between plantations. Free black communities, though hemmed in by law and constant threat, pooled scarce resources through mutual aid and burial societies and again, bought the freedom of relatives one painful sum at a time. Self-purchase and the purchase of kin were among the most common paths out of bondage. And after the war, when at last they could search openly, formerly enslaved people placed thousands of information-wanted advertisements in newspapers, hunting the mothers, children and spouses the trade had scattered, some reunions coming 50 years too late, and some coming true. Delphia and Junie were, in the end, among the fortunate few. Most were not. It is only right that we remember the many, even as we rejoice for the two. For rejoice we must, because the wagon that came up the Warfield Lane on a warm evening in May of 1850 carried a grey and bent and enormous old woman. And Delphia was waiting in the yard, and there are no words for the sound the two of them made when Junie climbed down and saw at last, after 30 years, the face of the child she had never stopped seeking. The old woman came off the wagon slow, her joints stiff from the long ride, and she stood in the lane and looked up. For even bent with age she had to look up only a little, mother and daughter of the same impossible height. And her hand rose to her mouth. She took one step and another, and then she reached out with a trembling hand and turned Delphia gently by the shoulder, the way you'd turn a child to check a hurt, and she pushed aside the collar of her dress, and there it was, the mark, round as a Spanish dollar, that she had kissed goodbye on a screaming 4-year-old 30 years and a lifetime ago. Junie made a sound that was not a word, that was older than words, and her knees went, and Delphia caught her mother up in those arms that had pulled stumps and lifted roof beams, held her up as easily as she'd have held a child, and the two of them sank down together into the red dust of the lane. They did not speak. They only held each other, rocking, while old Cato wept openly with his hat pressed to his chest, and Elias turned away to give them their moment, and found he could not see for the water in his own eyes. And Solomon the drayman took off his hat one last time, and looked at the two enormous women in the dirt, and thought, perhaps, of a sister on a road long ago, and let the tears run down and did not wipe them. And that night, in the warm kitchen of the failing farm that had somehow, against every arithmetic, not failed, Junie sat by the fire and took her daughter's great scarred hand in her own great scarred hand, and she began very softly to sing, the slow, rolling, wordless cradle song, the song that had lived in Delphia's body when everything else was locked behind a shut door. And Delphia, who had learned that year that she had never truly been alone, that she had carried her mother inside her all along, laid her head on the old woman's shoulder and hummed along, and finally, after a lifetime of watching the ice, let her whole weight rest. The farm never made a rich man of Elias Warfield. The land was still worn and the seasons were still hard, and the note was gone, but the poverty was not entirely. But it fed them all, the four of them, the odd cobbled family the auction block had assembled, the widower, the old man, the giant daughter, and the giant mother. And it was, by every account of the neighbors who had once laughed, a place with a great deal of laughing in it. Junie's hands, though slowed, remembered the healing arts of the quarters, and she doctored sick animals and sicker neighbors, black and white alike, until folk came to the Warfield place for remedies, the way they'd once come to laugh. Delphia never grew easy in crowds, and never lost the habit of sitting with her back to the wall, but the flinch went out of her over the years, the way a bruise fades, slowly, and then one day you notice it is gone. She learned to read the newspaper aloud to the others by the fire. She learned that a plate set out for her was not a trap. And Junie, who had spent 30 years singing a cradle song into an empty house, sang it now into a full one. If you had ridden past on the red clay road of an evening, in the years before the war came and changed everything, you might have heard it drifting from the lit kitchen window. Two enormous women's voices, low and rough and joined, singing a song with no words, out into the Carolina dark. It was the song a stolen child had carried in her body across a lifetime, and 4 sails and 1,000 miles, the one thing that could not be taken because it lived below the reach of any auction block, and it was the answer, at last, to a question a mother had asked into the dust of a road for 30 years, the oldest and most human question there is. Have you seen my child? Yes. Here she is, grown tall, grown strong, grown home. Come and rest now. The looking is over. Come and rest.